Welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. And Priscilla, here we are. It's the middle of spring. I don't know when we're sending this out, but last night we had quite a few storms here in Nashville. I was up till about 3:00 this morning.
Yeah, it's that time of year. Let me tell you, get in your tornado shelter if you live down here in these parts, right? Like it's crazy.
Yeah, it's that time of year. We've got a lull in all the sports that we care about. I mean, I still care about baseball. Don't like St. Louis Cardinals. That's still my thing. But as far as our college sports, we don't really have a lot. We've got baseball, but our hogs aren't doing very good this year.
And to be honest, not sure we're going to have a football team. I don't even know if we have players. But we'll see. We're going to have a basketball team. That's for sure. So
we do have a basketball team.
We can look forward to that. But yeah, this is my least favorite time of year for sports from now until SEC Media Days. That's kind of the way I look at it. In July, when SEC Media Days starts, and I'm like, okay, we're back.
Yeah. So did you hear that Dan Patrick on his radio show said that it looks like Nashville is going to get the 2030 Super Bowl at the brand new stadium?
Really?
Hasn't been officially announced, but I will tell you, traffic in Nashville is pretty awful all the time. But thinking about the Super Bowl being here for a week, we may be doing a lot of work from home days that week.
Yeah. Oh man, that will be something. Well, World Cup this summer, we didn't even talk about that, but that's like in a few places, right? Don't give me that stopper face you just gave me. I saw that.
I don't know. USA is not very good, so it's kind of hard for me to get into it. It's like it's like when you watch. Hosting. Yeah, it is cool we were hosting. So and what's crazy is I remember the last time we hosted because it was 1994, which was my senior year in high school. I do remember that.
Okay, we're gonna end our little intro with that because I was 93, by the way, so
all right.
I didn't realize that you were a year behind me, so I am smarter. I just didn't realize it.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it wouldn't have mattered when you graduated. We could have all said you were smarter. So
whatever.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, we normally do the resource and we each share some data, but this whole episode is about data because we are doing our Q1 driver recruiting and retention data rundown. We have some excellent data. We've also added a new section, so you'll hear all about that. So are you ready to dive into it?
Let's go.
All right. First, we have our economic and industry data, and we do have lots of interesting things going on in the market. So I've been speaking at conferences in the first quarter of this year. And one of the things that I kind of keep telling the crowds that are coming to my sessions is I would call this a yes and type of recruiting and retention environment, meaning there are lots of things going on. Yes, we have regulatory factors. And we have supply and demand factors, and we have economic factors. We talked about some of these last quarter. Obviously, a lot of them are still in play. Some new things that we've seen in Q1, and we're going to share some specific data around these, but truck driver job seekers in general are on the decline. I know you probably hoped that I would start with some good news, but I just want to point that out again. We have some specific data around that we can share with you. Also, driver quality is still very challenging. We can talk about some strategy that we're seeing really help out with that and how you can get to the more qualified or higher quality drivers in your pipeline. As freight market improvements are beginning to occur, we're seeing turnover start to rise. That's kind of traditionally what we see, and that is indeed happening at a lot of fleets. We've kind of been super comfortable over the past 2 or 3 years as far as recruiting and retention goes. It's been a little quieter, but I will say for sure during the first quarter of this year, we really began to see capacity tightening, folks seats getting a little hotter and people going, okay, what is going on? And I can tell you all of these factors are happening and more. And so we're going to kind of cover some of that today, but I think this is a good kind of lay of the land for us to look at. You're looking at competition also from some other skilled trades. For example, construction really has a tight labor market as well. And they have a shortage of labor and they are going and seeking after talent. There's other skilled trade industries that we typically kind of pull from as an industry for truck drivers. And so we're seeing those when they also need talent and we're kind of battling them for talent. That is always an economic factor that really comes into play. And then obviously we have a lot going on globally with the war with Iran and other just influences that are happening in the market that's impacting your operating ratios. And ultimately it does impact recruiting and retention as well. So we have a lot going on. Let's kind of dive into some of the specifics. One of the things that we did see, we have not seen this before. When we historically look at overall cost per hire, we typically see a drop between Q4 to Q1 because a lot of times folks have to spend more in Q4 to kind of overcome some of the competition. You're competing against holiday ads and those kinds of things. And so often, typically, cost per hire will drop a little in Q1. Normally it's around 14%. Unfortunately, this year, because there were less job seekers, because there's more competition for drivers, there's more jobs that are out there because freight is improving, we saw a 32% increase in cost per hire year over year. So when we look at Q1 2025 versus Q1 2026. And so that was pretty significant to us. We wanted to call that out. Again, it all stems back to supply and demand. Because there's more demand now for drivers, you're going to start seeing that cost increase. But there's also some things happening with some of the larger, I would say, job aggregators in the market. And those kinds of shifts that they're making to their models are also increasing costs. And so we can certainly dive into that offline. If you want to have conversations about that with your account executive or your sales executive, we can kind of dive into the weeds on that with you, but there's a lot going on in the market. Also, truck driver job seekers are declining. These are stats that came straight from Google. And we're going to talk about, there's a little bit of an impact here on how drivers are using AI to search. And so Google doesn't come into play as much as it previously did. But overall, search volume is still low for CDL jobs, truck driver jobs year over year. You can see these were down 18%, 33%. For owner operator jobs, it fell 45%. This is significant. Again, I hate to start with some challenging news, but also, want to let you know kind of what's going on in the market. But let's look at some good news. Clearly, we are seeing some freight market improvements throughout different sectors. Hopefully, you and your carrier are seeing these as well. These are just some headlines from the first quarter. You can see from some of the major outlets in trucking, just talking about how freight is improving, how rates are getting higher. Again, typically when we see this, we do see it impact driver demand in recruiting and also turnover on the retention side of things. Also, another big topic that folks are talking about right now is driver pay. So we wanted to give you, here's the average weekly pay by driver type. We pulled this directly out of Fleet Intel. If you're not part of our Fleet Intel community and you're wondering how your pay stacks up in the markets where you hire, it's a great resource for you to kind of look at that and see how you stack up. And you can see this is average weekly pay by driver type, just overall high level. If you want to kind of dig down by zip code and get it a little more nitty gritty, then you can do that in Fleet Intel. One of the things I will say is there are lots and lots of rumblings. There's two questions that I get asked a lot, as I'm kind of at industry events speaking about recruiting and retention data. And one of those this year has been related to driver pay. When do you think everybody's going to start increasing driver pay again? I feel like a lot of you are just kind of standing by and seeing what ends up happening. We have seen, I will say we have seen fleets beginning to offer sign-on bonuses again, and it has been a minute since we had seen that. Those are kind of starting to creep back up. Also, we're seeing fleets get super creative with how they're paying. So instead of doing an across the board sweep in, oh, we're going to increase cents per mile across our entire fleet, we're seeing carriers say, okay, we're going to offer percentage pay for these particular routes, or maybe we're going to offer these types of tenure bonuses or safety bonuses or fuel bonuses, depending on how you compensate your drivers. So I think fleets are getting creative with that. A lot of folks don't have room to do an across the board driver pay increase just financially. As an organization, that's difficult right now. And so they're looking at ways of how they can get creative. I think the driver pay conversation is going to be one that we're going to continue to talk about. Obviously, it's something that we're tracking very closely using our fleet intel tool. And if you're interested in that, you can always reach out to us and we can get you information on that as well. Okay, let's move on to advertising and marketing data. Again, you guys know this is kind of our bread and butter, if you will. This is where we kind of live and breathe. And there's a lot going on. If you are a conversion interactive agency client, you will be receiving our exclusive benchmarking data that includes cost per hire, cost per lead, leads per hire by carrier type. We will be sending that out later today, so you can check your email for that, and you will be receiving that. But when you look at our overall best performing strategies for Q1, here's kind of how it landed. And again, this is overall touch points and hires. SEM aware is what we call, it's search engine marketing. This is typically number 2. So normally SEM interactive, which are the larger digital job aggregators, Indeed, Glassdoor, ZipRecruiter, all of those fall under SEM Interactive. That fell under number 2. Some of those platforms are making some changes and it's impacting cost per hire, in some cases pretty significantly. So we saw SEM Aware, which is more of a top of funnel digital strategy that includes things like Google, Yahoo, things that are at the top of the funnel. But we really saw Google Performance Max campaigns in particular kind of provide some good cost per hire, good strategy. Social advertising, again, is a great strategy that we see that does really well. And then the Lead Assist tool was the number 1 tool that touched lots and lots of hires. And we'll kind of dig into that as we talk more about AI. Apply starts for truck driver positions. This is just some trends that we see. We got from our friends at Indeed from October to February. Apply starts for truck driving positions were down. So this also supports that whole data set that I shared with you earlier about how online searches in general for truck driver jobs are down. This is not a good sign, okay, for folks. And so just keep that in mind. 86% of sponsored apply starts are typically taking place on the first page of search results. So just keep that in mind, depending on what strategy you're using when you're working with these types of sources, making sure that you're on that first page really can pay off. In some cases, obviously it does impact cost, but you can talk to your strategist about that. Also, I don't think I mentioned early on, you guys, if you have questions at any time, our webinars are super informal. You can throw those in your chat or in the Q&A, and we'll take any questions you have as we go here. Also, we did a case study. We obviously, it has been a challenge. We've seen that the keyword searches for truck driver jobs had reached an all-time low for a 12-month period. And so this is a specific example from one client and how a shift that we made kind of impacted that. So what we did is we proactively reallocated the budget from just a traditional search campaign to what's called a Google Performance Max campaign. So when you're thinking about this, when you do Google Performance Max, it allows you to really use the whole ad network within Google. So you're talking display, search, Gmail, maps, all the things that are Google related. You can use images, text, even video. It's just kind of an amplified, I would say. It's not your traditional search campaign. And the results actually end up being they did great in this particular instance. We've seen this work well for not just this client, for other accounts as well. So just wanted to throw this out there as an example of a case study for some strategy that's working well from a digital standpoint. Also, here's some other digital and social media trends that we're seeing. And social advertising, the cost per hire on social advertising actually declined. And so I think that is a significant call out because overall cost per hire increased. So just something to think about. If you're not doing social advertising, that might be something that you consider putting in your mix. Top 3 meta lead volume sources you can see were the news feed, Facebook Reels, Instagram Reels. Again, drivers just really enjoy or really engage with content that they see from a social standpoint in those particular areas. And then listen, Threads makes up a small amount and a small share of what we would consider overall results. But we just wanted to call out it is a platform that's starting to show some signs of growth. And so we are continuing to keep an eye on that. We do have a few clients there. And so we're just kind of watching that and seeing how all of that plays out. Also, on AI impact, the next section that we have is our AI impact data. And we just wanted to share some data with you of what's going on from an AI standpoint and how AI is really impacting recruiting and retention. This is some data that we pulled from a recent LinkedIn talent acquisition leader survey, also resume.org. This is just overall folks that are like you who are in the recruiting and retention game. And you can see that several recruiting leaders plan on using AI this year. 70% believe that it's going to help them have meaningful conversations with candidates. And we can tell you that that's definitely the case. I'm going to show you some data surrounding that here in just a minute. 73% said they felt unprepared. And here's what I just want to make sure that you know and understand that the way we look at this is we know and understand your job is to recruit and retain drivers so that your organization can haul the freight that you need for your customers. A lot of times that doesn't allow you the bandwidth to be able to stay on top of what's going on in AI and recruiting. And we have an AI center of excellence here. We are on top of it. So we are, whether you partner with us, whether you don't, maybe you just come and grab some of the data and information that we share, and that is perfectly fine. But we just want to let you know if you have any questions, if there's anything that you're concerned about or that you feel unprepared with, let us know. We have a full, like I said, an AI Center of Excellence team, and that's all they're focused on is making sure that we're meeting with attorneys and that we're on top of everything from a legal standpoint, that we're looking at how can this help from a specific driver recruiting standpoint and not just overall AI in general. And also AI can help you with many other departments within your trucking company besides just recruiting, but that's for another day. We're talking recruiting today. So, one of the data sets that came out of Q1 is Truck Drivers USA did a quick survey to drivers and they asked them, are you using AI in your job search? And 23% said they were. We are asking this on our current driver survey that we're in right now as well. We do a spring and fall driver survey every year with PDA. And we're asking this because we're curious how much it's gone up. One of the things that I think is interesting is we asked this question in 2024 and it was 0.02% in late 2024. So it's been just over a year in February of 2026 and it had already gone up to 23%. This is happening. Drivers are using AI to search. And so I asked our GPTO team we have a team that works on optimizing your digital assets for AI visibility when it comes to drivers searching jobs and even just for your brand in general. And so I said, hey, team, y'all give me some common prompts that drivers are using. And these are the most common ones that I got back from the team. So they're saying like they're basically, in some cases, they're saying find jobs that pay over X amount, or what's the best paying CDLA companies for regional driver in Ohio or regional driver in Chicago or whatever that might be. And then lots of prompts that are coming through relating to new drivers in the industry, which is kind of an indicator that maybe some of these are younger folks that are using AI more, but I thought these were interesting. So I wanted to just give you kind of some practical examples of what some of these prompts actually look like. Next, we have some information on our Lead Assist Agentic tool. This is our customized AI agents that we deploy for carriers who are interested in Lead Assist. And carriers who did deploy this in Q1 actually had 26% more hires. Carriers who didn't had 16% less hires year over year. So if you're looking at quarter over quarter from Q1 2025 to Q1 2026, this is how the data broke down. To look at it a little more specifically, I provided here 3 different clients, 3 that used Lead Assist Agentic and 3 without. And so this just gives you an idea of actual hard numbers. We didn't share the client name or anything, but you can see like how it's translating. And the main reason that they're getting more hires is because their recruiters are speaking to pre-qualified, interested drivers. So they're not having to spend time chasing down drivers that are either unqualified or not interested. And that is the differentiator here. A lot of times we'll talk to clients and they'll be like, oh, my recruiters they're a little leery of using AI agents. And then a week later, they're like, oh my gosh, they love it because now they're not having to spend all these hours chasing down drivers that aren't qualified. The agent does that for them and really kind of weeds out of the pack those that aren't interested or those who are not qualified to begin with. AI agents are completing significant number of driver calls after hours. You can see here it's about 54%. So we thought that was kind of compelling to just show what that looks like and how AI is kind of impacting that. And then finally, we really wanted to give you a good representation of the breadth of what the online AI signals for employer brands look like. So in other words, when a driver goes to ChatGPT, for example, and uses one of those prompts that we showed earlier, how does ChatGPT go and find the information that they deliver back, right? And so we actually asked ChatGPT, hey, how are you weighting online signals and influences when it comes to employer brands and information that you're giving back? So I think that the takeaway here is to really understand that it's not just about your jobs and your job descriptions and your own brand's content. It's also about your driver reviews, what drivers are saying about you on forums, whether we like it or not. That it is curating that content as well. It's also looking at where are you showing up in the news? What kind of reporting is your company being reported on? So I think we're kind of basically content is king is coming back really as a meaningful part of the conversation when it comes to your employer brand, because everything that's online about your organization is what these AI platforms are searching, whether we like it or not. Okay. And so it's really important that all of your content, your digital assets are optimized for, we call it GPTO, but they're optimized for AI search visibility. We're doing it for our brand as well. So, and I can tell you it's been very, very compelling. So again, if you're interested in talking to us about that, we're happy to chat with you. But I thought this was interesting to see kind of how they weight the online signals and influences. Okay, Scott, we are going to dive into our driver retention data from PDA.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thanks everybody for your time today. So what changed in Q1 of 2026? Not much from the driver feedback side of things. What drivers are saying is kind of what they've been saying, but what we're starting to see is the shift in what they're doing about it. So the same issues that drivers are raising to us in real time in our weekly phone calls that we have with drivers every day are now starting to appear kind of clearly in the voluntary turnover data, and we'll get into that here in a second. But what that's doing is it's reinforcing that the retention risk is not random. We're seeing that it's predictable and it's cumulative. And so you can see here, equipment kind of remains the top issue. And what we're seeing there is, and we'll get into this here in a second, but how when equipment breaks down, everything else seems to follow. Most of the equipment related frustration is driven by gaps in maintenance, not necessarily in the equipment age alone. We know over the last couple of years, companies have extended their trade-in cycles. And so, we started to see more breakdowns, but what we're seeing now is kind of execution gaps in maintenance and how that's affecting the drivers. It's still important equipment condition at the time of assignment after you guys have invested time and money bringing in a new driver, and what that equipment looks like when you assign it to them out of orientation. We're still hearing from drivers that that's kind of their first signal that they use to evaluate a company. And so what we're seeing, though, is that equipment issues drive turnover when they become patterns, not really kind of a one-time incident. And we'll talk about that here in a second. From a compensation side of things, the dissatisfaction in Q1 was really driven more by unstable earnings rather than kind of that base pay or that pay rate. That is something that we also have seen consistently kind of throughout this prolonged freight recession as well. What we're seeing is that the miles consistency is the most important factor in shaping how drivers perceive their compensation. And what we've seen in the data is that the pay rate becomes a perceived issue when drivers cannot reliably achieve their expected earnings or what they think they should be earning from a mileage standpoint. From an operational side of things, that's usually, those top three issues are usually pretty much the same. We've seen kind of compensation a couple times take over from the equipment side on the number one issue, but operations is pretty consistently number three. But what we're seeing is that the operational issues really consistently influence the driver's daily experience. They don't just, the inefficiencies in operations don't just create the problems, they're amplifying some of those existing ones, whether it's compensation or equipment. Communication, major issue. It's no longer just kind of part of operations in itself. It is becoming a direct driver of retention or a driver of turnover, depending on how you look at it. So just kind of a top level overview there of kind of our core issues. We can go to the next slide, Priscilla. So here were the top 10 root cause issues from drivers who voluntarily left their position in Q1 of 2026. Most of the turnover that we saw in Q1 kind of remains tied to operational and execution related factors. Drivers are leaving due to earnings unpredictability, not simply for the higher pay. As I mentioned just a second ago, how the pay rate kind of becomes a perceived issue when drivers don't achieve what they're expecting. Equipment issues move from frustration to turnover when they repeatedly disrupt a driver's ability to work. The predictability thing, the consistency thing, that has really been driving turnover over the last couple of years in particular. What we're seeing is that drivers will tolerate the operational challenge, but not how those challenges are communicated. So when there's silence accompanying the challenges that they're having operationally, that amplifies their frustration, that pushes to turnover. So that turnover is driven by accumulated disruption, not an isolated event. And so what we really saw in Q1 is that drivers are not necessarily asking for more. I'm sure if you're offering, they'll be happy to take it. But what they're asking for really is more consistency. So here's where we're going to kind of touch on some of the equipment issues a little further. As you can see, not only were the equipment issues the top core feedback issue that we got in Q1, but it was also the top issue for voluntary quits. What we're seeing is that it's most prevalent when equipment issues are coupled with other issues, and specifically pay or consistency, like I've been saying. So when that equipment issue becomes a compensation issue and it affects their inability to log consistent miles, that's when that equipment issue becomes a compensation issue. What we've seen is that equipment issues by themselves aren't necessarily a huge predictor in turnover. It's when those equipment issues are accompanied by other issues. So what I would tell you in particular is it is extremely important right now to know which of your drivers are the drivers that are experiencing the one-off kind of breakdown that kind of happens that nobody can control. It just, that's part of the industry, versus who are your drivers that are experiencing equipment issues that lead to compensation issues or lead to friction with operations or extended time in the shop. If you have the ability to quickly identify who those drivers are and quickly intervene with them, the chances of you keeping that driver are much, much higher than if you don't know who those drivers are. So again, miles consistency, the compensation issues as it relates to miles are the strongest predictor of turnover in Q1. At least that's what we saw when we really dug into the voluntary quit data. As you can see, 64% of the drivers that were complaining about compensation were talking about miles, or more importantly, lack thereof, not their pay rate. So miles and load stability right now is the major driver of turnover. And what I can say is I've done a lot of research and digging into the feedback. And in the last 6 months alone, drivers that complain about loads not being available, inconsistent miles, or perceived poor scheduling and planning had a quit rate of roughly 40%. So knowing who those drivers are and getting in front of those issues is extremely important. One of the biggest themes we've seen consistently during the freight recession, and I've talked about it here, is really centered around predictability, specifically predictability of pay and predictability of home time. And drivers certainly understand that the market is uncertain. We've all seen that over the last few years. But what they're reacting to, or what's driving some of that turnover, is the level of consistency that they're receiving within that uncertainty. So, example, equipment issues disrupt productivity. The disrupted productivity impacts their earnings, and then the communication gaps delay some sort of resolution. That's kind of the pattern that we've seen, not just in Q1 of 2026, but even going back probably into last year and even into 2024. So we're not necessarily facing new retention challenges, but what we are seeing is that these same challenges have clearer consequences right now with drivers quitting as they're looking for that consistency. So kind of going on some of the stuff that Priscilla said as it relates to the market and how the market is shifting, the challenge, frankly, is only going to become more steep from a turnover side of things. With the market, the driver market tightening, as you all are well aware, I would tell you right now, keeping the drivers that you have is going to be extremely important. It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. I think that we're still in the kind of this weird position that even if freight just rebounds just a little bit, combined with that tightening of the driver market, I think we're still on the verge of seeing some rather significant driver churn. And so focusing on retention is going to help, obviously, your bottom line, but it's also going to help your recruiting team as they are out there grinding to bring in new drivers.
All right. Good stuff. Thank you, Scott. Okay, just got a few more data sets here that we will wrap up with. This is just our driver section where we curate just overall information about the driver market. The average age of truck drivers is increasing. No one's surprised there, right? 20% of drivers are under the age of 35. Compare that to the overall U.S. labor market. 35% of regular workers in the U.S. labor market are under the age of 35. So that's kind of how far behind we are as an industry. Also, truck driver show rates for scheduled calls through Agentic. So if you're wondering, okay, are drivers really showing up for these calls with recruiters that the AI agent scheduled? You can see on average 45% show up to 67% for some carriers. So you can just kind of get an idea of how that looks and how that works. Also, we always kind of compile top driver review keywords from positive driver reviews and negative driver reviews. You can see kind of where these keywords land. These are words that are showing up regularly within either positive or negative driver reviews. And then we also do a breakdown of where the review ratings break down. Unfortunately, for Q1, the 1-star reviews had the highest percentage, followed by 5-star. I always say drivers are super polarizing. They either love you or they don't. And they like to talk about it. So, but this, you can kind of see like where the actual driver reviews landed. So that is our data rundown. All right. So that wraps up our Q1 data rundown. Now, what our podcast listeners don't get to hear, so you should join the webinar if you can, is we just had more questions than we've ever had on a data rundown webinar. I think since we've been doing them, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, not even close.
Yes. Like lots of questions about what's going on with the CDL, the non-domiciled CDL issue, what's going on with owner operators in that market. I mean, there's a lot there. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us and we can get you the recording.
There's a lot going on right now,
to
say the least. So a lot of questions, fuel prices, driver capacity, all that kind of stuff. So people should, to participate in the Q&A, you should definitely register for our next one. They're free and we have them every quarter. So you should do that. But on top of that, speaking of all the good stuff, so like coming up on the next episode, as most of you know that have listened to this, we do 2 driver surveys a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. And so in our next episode, we're going to actually dig into the results of our spring 2026 driver survey, that will have a lot more recruiting and retention data. There's some interesting things that we're seeing in there. We're not complete yet. We've been in the field for a couple of weeks and there's some interesting results coming in and we can't wait to share those with you. So make sure you tune into that next month.
Yes, I'm very excited to see what all comes out of that driver survey. So thanks for listening to the resource today. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming episodes.
And as always, you can find details on how to connect with us in the show notes below, and we will see you next time.